there is a very strong chance that you have already spent quite a bit of time alone. For example, during a certain pandemic in 2020. At the same time, you may also have gone on vacation to an island at some point, regardless of its size. But what would happen if we combine those two things? Well, that is exactly the topic of today's video, and for that we are obviously going to need a test subject. On paper, you have dealt with much worse, because today you will not be facing particularly extreme conditions. At least, that is what we will see. On top of that, you will have some peace and quiet, since you will be completely alone on a small deserted island. You will be stepping into the shoes of Chuck Nolan, the main character from Castaway, and you will also be following in the footsteps of Bear Grylls, the British mountaineer, adventurer, and writer you probably all know. Now that the setting is clear, what is this actually going to look like? What are the chances of dying from hunger or thirst? Can loneliness really drive someone insane? Or, over a 6-month period, are you simply going to live the good life under the shade of palm trees? It is time to answer today's question. 6 months alone on a desert island. What's it like? At the moment you are dropped off, there is not much to report. You are in good shape and highly motivated to take on this new adventure, but that might not last. Watching the helicopter that dropped you off disappear into the sky already feels strange. As it flies farther away, the sound of the engine fades, and once complete silence sets in, you fully realize that you are alone. Aside from the sounds you make yourself, you will not hear a single human noise for 6 months. This feeling of solitude is similar to what Alexander Selkirk experienced, the man who inspired the story of Robinson Crusoe. What is interesting is that at first, he was actually eager to be dropped off on a deserted island. The captain of the ship he worked on had put him in irons after an attempted mutiny. Being put in irons simply meant that he was chained in the ship's hold, like a prisoner. To avoid staying any longer with a captain he considered incompetent, Selkirk asked to be dropped off on the next island the ship encountered. Of course, he believed that other sailors, the one who had argued with the captain, would follow him, but when he found himself alone on the beach, watching the small boat that had just dropped him off head back toward the ship, he changed his mind and begged the captain not to abandon him. The captain found it amusing and sailed away. As it turned out, Selkirk made the right choice. Sometime later, the ship sank and almost the entire crew died. The second day begins, you wake up, and to say the least, the first night was not great. At first, you thought sleeping on the beach was a good idea, since sand is much more comfortable than rocks or hard ground. The problem is that along the shoreline, you are completely exposed to the elements. Heavy rain can hit unexpectedly, and on top of that, temperatures drop in the evening. Despite this, stubborn as you are, you eventually fell asleep on the sand. That did not last long, as you were woken up by a downpour that soaked you completely. As a result, you moved into a cave, which offers slightly better protection from the weather. Because your clothes were wet, the night was very cold, since temperatures on the island dropped significantly after dark. In other words, by the morning of your second day on the island, you have just had a miserable night and you are already less fit than the day before. But more importantly, your stomach is growling and you are starting to feel really hungry. As far as hunger is concerned, there is no immediate cause for concern. A human can generally survive about a month without eating, as long as they drink enough. Thirst, on the other hand, is a much more urgent issue. Your island is fairly hot, and even though a human can survive around 3 days without drinking, that time frame is greatly reduced in a hostile environment. For reference, the record for surviving without drinking is held by an Austrian man named Andreas Mihavesk, who lasted 18 days without water. Arrested by the police after being involved in a car accident, he was placed in a cell and simply forgotten by the guards. As a result, Andreas went 18 days without eating or drinking, surviving by licking monsters off the walls of his cell to avoid completely drying out. By the end of his ordeal, he had lost 24 kilograms. But let us return to our deserted island, because the conditions here are very different. Over the course of this first week, your morale keeps slipping a little more with each passing day. That's because despite all the efforts you put in every single day, you still can't properly meet your basic needs. In fact, finding food and water becomes the main thing on your mind and takes up a large part of your days. Whatever time you have left, you spent trying to start a fire without any success. Because no, you can't just assume that lighting a pile of twigs in a hostile environment is something you can pull off in one afternoon, especially if you have have no idea what you're doing. Not everyone is Bear Grylls.
And if I just peed on the ground, that's all those fluids wasted.
And even he admits that it can sometimes take him around 20 hours to finally get a fire going. These repeated failures slowly grind down your morale, day after day. It's a bit like when a video game boss wipes the floor with you for the 50th time in a row, and no matter how hard you try, you just can't beat it. Each attempt leaves you a little more frustrated, while steadily chipping away at your morale. After 2 weeks, your morale is clearly not in great shape. Little by little, you lose patience. Everything starts to get on your nerves because all of your time is spent just trying to survive, staying out of the rain, finding food and water, and once again, trying to start a fire. You would like to spend some time exploring the island to look for new resources or to figure out ways to improve your living conditions, but you're completely drained of motivation and want to conserve your energy. Put simply, your inability to improve your situation despite all of your efforts is really dragging your morale down. That said, this slump suddenly gives way to a feeling of euphoria after several days of trying to start a fire using different methods. And remember, you don't have a lighter. We can reasonably assume that you finally managed to get one going. Persistence eventually pays off. You jump for joy because the flames open up incredible possibilities, being able to cook food, boil water, which reduces the risk of food poisoning and lets you eat warm meals. And above all, you can finally push back the darkness and the cold of the night. In short, you feel like you've crossed an important milestone, and that's exactly what Ed Stafford felt, a seasoned adventurer who took on the challenge of spending 60 days alone on a deserted island. Even though he was used to this kind of challenge, it still took him 13 days to start a fire, so there is little chance you would do better than him, sorry. The fire gives you a boost, both physically and mentally, and that makes perfect sense. Survival is a delicate balance between several vital needs, and fire makes it much easier to maintain that balance. You have multiple needs, and if one of them starts to take over, everything else falls apart. Let me give you a simple example. Without fire, you sleep poorly at night because you're cold. And let me remind you that it can get very, very cold on your island, and you have no way to keep warm. You're naked. Night after night, fatigue builds up. That fatigue reduces your mental sharpness and makes it harder to concentrate. A bit like having to sit an exam the day after pulling an all-nighter. As a result, you're less focused when looking for food and you eat less. That weakens you and reduces your resistance to the cold, and the cycle keeps going. A real vicious cycle. With fire, you can break that cycle and maintain the strength you need to survive. After 2 months on the island, the relative autonomy you've gained allows you to establish a kind of survival routine that you make a point of sticking to. Your days are split into several parts, each devoted to a specific task, such as gathering wood for the fire or finding food. By keeping your mind busy with a variety of tasks, this routine helps you fight off melancholy and loneliness, two feelings that, for all intents and purposes, never really leave you. Because you're focused on the present moment and on immediate concrete tasks, you don't have time to dwell on the fact that you're alone and far from your loved ones. It's a mental strategy your mind uses to keep you from losing your sanity. Organizing your time also helps you fight boredom and inactivity, while managing your vital needs more effectively. You even start taking on projects to improve your living conditions and become more self-sufficient. The next step is to build a shelter in a nicer spot than the cave you're currently squatting in. But to build a shelter, you first need to choose a location and figure out how to put it together, and that will take time and, above all, a lot of effort, since you'll need to cut palm branches, weave the leaves together to make walls, and then build a structure to support everything. You are now just a few days away from the end of your journey, and yet you still don't feel time passing. You've been living in your shelter for a while now. It's rustic, but you've grown attached to it, especially considering how much effort it took to build. Even though you're still living in precarious conditions, you now have a daily routine with its ups and downs. You started growing certain plants, and the few wild pigs you managed to capture are kept in a small enclosure you built yourself. 6 months is a long time, that even if you had spent 5 years alone on the island, you still wouldn't hold the record of the longest stretch of solitude on a deserted island. Not even after 10 years, because the record is 18 years. Robinson Crusoe doesn't really compare. And that famous record is held by a woman known as Juana Maria. She lived for 18 years on a small islet off the coast of Los Angeles. And in her case, there was practically nothing on the island, not even a few trees to build some kind of shelter. So, she managed to build herself a hut made of whale bones. She survived by hunting the wild birds that lived on the island. And when, after 18 years of solitude, sailors finally came to rescue her, she had not lost her sanity. Since no one spoke her language, communication was difficult, but she spent her time singing and was greatly appreciated by everyone who met her. Unfortunately, she died just a few months after being rescued. After nearly 20 years of eating nothing but birds, her stomach couldn't handle the sudden change in diet, and she died of dysentery, a fairly serious disease whose details I'll spare you. That said, Juana Maria is a proof that a human being can survive on a deserted island for many years. As you've probably gathered by now, spending 6 months alone on a deserted island is entirely possible, even though it remains an extremely demanding ordeal. There would be physical and psychological after effects, but in this specific case, you should be able to push your limits, which in the long run might actually toughen you up. That said, everyone is different, and each person would react in their own way, and the geographical location of the island you end up also plays a very important role in the equation. None of that would stop you from being over the moon when someone finally comes to pick you up and take you back to civilization. Let's be honest. Which reminds me, I need to send someone to go get our test subject. And as for you, if you've ever spent time completely alone in an unusual place, feel free to tell us about it.